The next question is on B-fold content, sampling and the distribution of different organisms based on different environmental factors. White clover plants have two variants. You've got cyanogenic variants produce a toxin when their cells are damaged. Acyanogenic variants do not produce a toxin. So I'm going to highlight the key words there, just so that it's easy to see amongst all that writing. The cells of the clover plants can be damaged by freezing temperatures or by snails. So the snails will eat the plants, and the clover plants release the toxin as a defense mechanism, because the toxin kills snails but also damages the plant. The table shows the two variants and their growing regions. So acyanogenic is found in colder climates, cyanogenic is found in warmer climates. So what I would do if I was doing this question, I would add some information here that's going to summarize all of that so it's an easy to see format. So acyanogenic, colder climates, does not produce toxin. Cyanogenic, on the other hand, does produce a toxin. So I've summarized that information nice and easy so I can see it quickly. Complete the hypothesis to link each variant to the region it is most often found. So a hypothesis is a prediction based on scientific knowledge. So a prediction of what you think the outcome is going to be. They've said complete it because they've started it for you. So they've given you the prediction, you just now need to give the reason. So acyanogenic variants are found in colder climates because. Okay, so you need to find the reason for why the acyanogenic variants are found in colder climates. So it makes sense that these variants are found in colder regions because they do not produce the toxin. Because if they did produce the toxin, the cells would be damaged. Okay, so the plants would not survive if they did produce the toxin. Okay, so the cyanogenic variants could not live in colder climates because they produce a toxin, whereas the acyanogenic do not. So acyanogenic variants are found in colder climates because they do not release toxin when cells are damaged by the cold. There'll also probably fewer snails in colder climates because they prefer having warmer climates. So they're not going to need the toxin as a protective mechanism. However, the cyanogenic variants are found in warmer climates, okay, because they couldn't survive in colder climates because they produce the toxin. Okay, and you can also predict that in warmer climates you're going to have more snails, and therefore they're going to need the toxin as a protective mechanism. Okay, so cyanogenic variants are found in warmer climates because they release a toxin that protects them from predation of snails. Okay, so they're protecting them and preventing them from being eaten by the snails. The next question. To investigate a hypothesis, a field study is needed. Sampling techniques are used to estimate the population size of each variant in different areas. Why are sampling techniques used instead of counting the total number of individual plants in each area? So sampling is used in all investigations because simply it would take too long investigate the entire area. Okay, so if we were trying to count the number of clovers in an entire area, it was too many to count. You're likely to lose count, and it will be inaccurate. Okay, so simply too many to count individually. Alright, that alone will be enough to get you the 1 mark. It's only a 1 mark, so you just need a one simple statement. Okay. Alright, 2 students investigate the plant variants living in altitudes of 0 to 250 meters. The student used random sampling as a starting point of their investigation. They go on to complete a transect. Okay. Explain how random sampling differs from a transect. So here you need to remember the difference between random sampling and systematic. So whenever you use a transect, you were talking about systematic sampling. Explain how random sampling differs from a transect. So random sampling, remember, is used when you're trying to estimate the total population from an area. Whereas systematic sampling, you used when you're trying to find a trend or a pattern in your data. So here, 2 marks, not too much things to write, but you just need to highlight the differences between the two. So, random sampling uses quadrats placed randomly over an area. Notice I'm being very clear about which type of sampling I'm talking about. I'm then going to say what a transect is, or how transects are used. Okay, and I'm going to do a different line, so I'm giving the marker easy directions over my points. Whereas a transect places the quadrats in a line to show a pattern in distribution. So I spaced out my points nice and easily, doing a separate line so the examiner can spot the different points easily. Explain why using a transect would develop and improve their investigation. So here they're asking, why have they used both of them? Okay, so why not just stick with random sampling, sorry. How does the transect improve the investigation? How does it make the investigation better? So using random sampling, all you're going to get is an estimate of the number of clovers within the area between 0 and 250 meters. That's not going to tell you any changes over altitude. A transect, on the other hand, is going to show the change in distribution from altitudes of 0 all the way up to 250. So you're going to get an idea of how the altitude affects the distribution of the clovers. So I'm literally just going to write that down. So random sampling just shows the number of plants in the whole area. So I've highlighted the issue with just using random sampling. I'm now going to say, why does a transect improve that? The transects show how the plant vary at different altitudes. Again, see how I've structured my answer, given a nice easy space for the marker to see my points. The question goes on to say, figure 15.1, the graph, shows the number of cyanogenic variant plants found in a total clover population of 200 at different altitudes. What conclusion can be made about the effect of altitude on the distribution of cyanogenic clover? Okay, so the graph here, you've got the number of cyanogenic clovers out of 200, and then you've got altitude, so it's going from 0 all the way up to 250, so we're getting high altitude here. So remember, here you had to talk about remember that altitude, the higher up you get, is usually colder. Okay, so if you want to write colder there as well, and that's going to be warmer. Because we're going to bring in information that we've had from the previous question in answering our questions. So, out of a total 200, so 200 is going to be both cyanogenic and acyanogenic. Okay, so if if they've given the number of 60 being cyanogenic, all right, there's going to be 140 acyanogenic at this point. What conclusion can be made about the effect of altitude on distribution of cyanogenic clover? So conclusion, what is the outcome of this investigation? So always look at the graph. As the altitude is increasing, what you're noticing about the trend and pattern in the number of cyanogenic clovers. Okay, they're giving you a line of best fit, so we've got a negative correlation here. So as altitude gets higher, the number of cyanogenic clovers decreases. And that's simply all you need to say. So as altitude increases, the number of cyanogenic clovers decreases. Predict the altitude where you would expect to find mostly acyanogenic clover plants. Explain why most clover plants are acyanogenic at that altitude. Okay. So here you've got to see you've got cyanogenic plants are here are having a similar distribution. They then start to go down at this point. So then you can expect your acyanogenic clovers to be in the majority here, and throwing very little cyanogenic clovers at this area. Okay, so I would say altitudes above 150, as that's when you get to see that big decrease in numbers of cyanogenic clovers. Okay, so altitudes above 150 meters. This kind of question here, there'll probably be a range of answers that they would give you if you've done that. Okay, so anything probably above 150, they would have given you the mark for that one. So you also have to explain why. So why have we given it this? Okay, and this is when we're going to need our information from our table over here. So remember, the higher up in altitude, the colder it's going to be. Okay, and we find that colder climates we have our acyanogenic variants because they do not produce a toxin, so they will not get damaged by freezing temperatures. Okay, so explanation is simply the higher altitudes are colder. Giving cyanogenic plants the advantage. So remember, all different living species compete with others. Okay, so the acyanogenic and the cyanogenic plants are going to be in competition. So as they've got an advantage by not being damaged by the cold, you're going to more likely find the acyanogenic plants in the colder areas. And indeed, that leads us on to D. Use the theory of natural selection to explain how cyanogenic variant of clover would have developed or could have developed. Okay. So natural selection, and we're going to talk about cyanogenic variants. Okay, so all questions that you get given with natural selection, you need to follow a simple format. Okay, and I'm going to just do it over here. So you're going to answer it first. Always start with mutation. Mutations give variation within a population, and the variation means that different individuals are going to have the advantage. Okay, after you've mentioned mutation, you are then going to talk about what is this advantage? State advantage. So how is this mutation giving that organism an advantage, or those organisms an advantage? The next point you're going to say, alright, is that they're going to more likely reproduce. Because they've got an advantage, they're more likely to survive to an age where they can reproduce. Okay, but it's more likely. And then the fourth point, okay, is that as they reproduce, they're going to pass on the allele to offspring. Okay, that's the format I want you to answer all your natural selection questions. Mutation, you state the advantage the mutation gives. These organisms with this advantage are more likely to survive to an age where they reproduce and therefore pass on their allele to the offspring. And what you need to do is apply this format to the situation they give you. So here you've got the cyanogenic variants. Okay, if you need to, go back to your information here. Cyanogenic, warmer climates produce toxin. They produce a toxin that protects it against the snails. So that is going to be the advantage. They're going to get less predation by the snails. So if you need to remind yourself, put toxin. Okay, don't start writing about acyanogenic plants here, because that would be the instinct, because the last question was on it. Okay, make sure that you read the question carefully. So, mutation. I'm going to make a bullet point. Cyanogenic plants had a mutation that the ability to produce toxin. Right? Plants that produce toxin are less likely to be eaten. So here I've stated my advantage. I've got point 2. Point 3, more likely to reproduce. Plants with toxin more likely to reproduce. Point 4, this passes on the allele to the offspring. Okay. Passing on the allele for producing toxin to offspring. Okay, here notice I've said allele. Okay, you could have also said gene, but do not say passing on the physical trait. Always mention it's the allele, because we're talking about reproduction and the inheritance of genes. So always refer to it as the allele being passed on. Okay, that will often be underlined and in bold. It needs to be stated to get the answer. Okay, so just by simply following these steps, you should be able to answer any natural selection question. Okay, but always give it into the context that they've provided.